Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 224 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, we take a look at quiet leaders. Now, these are leaders who are more on the introverted side of things, and I'm one of these myself. And I notice when I do a lot of training and coaching work that many of the leaders that work with me or are in the room are on the quiet side, and they have a certain set of challenges. And we're going to walk through some of those challenges today, and I'm going to give a few of my tips on being a quiet leader and how to lead effectively if that's your way of operating. Let's get into the episode right now. So quiet leaders are all around us, and if you listen, you just might hear them. But quiet leaders have a problem. Many people have expectations that leadership should be loud, engaging, charismatic, and extroverted. And these expectations can be a challenge for quiet leaders as they strive to gain credibility and have their voice heard over the din of our busy workplaces. So in this episode, I want to provide some tips for the quiet leaders out there. After all, I'm a quiet leader myself. I'm not the most introverted person you'll ever meet, but I'm certainly on the quieter side of that spectrum. Now, firstly, to clarify something. Now, we often speak in absolutes. She's an extrovert or he's an introvert. It's convenient to be able to apply that label to people, but the reality is that the introvert and extrovert traits lie on a spectrum, like a bell curve. And most people lie in the middle of that bell curve, but you'll find people at both ends of the curve who are more introverted or extroverted than others. Now, the people in the middle are called the ambiverts, who have both extroverted and introverted traits. Now, for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to be referring to quiet leaders as those who fall on the introverted side of this bell curve. But this doesn't mean they don't have any extroverted traits at all. Now, I recently ran a training course specifically aimed at introverted leaders, and in it we ran a little online test which gives you an extroversion score from 1 to 100. So a 1 is a super introvert and 100 is a super extrovert. Now, the people in the course range from about 20 up to 45 out of 100, and I myself got a score of 35. So even in that particular training course, we weren't dealing with pure introverts. We're looking at a range of people at different points in the spectrum. There's a related post I'd get you to check out as well. Introverted leaders versus extroverted leaders, who wins? You can check that out by going to the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/224. Now, another thing that's quite interesting and useful to think about is that quiet leaders can flex their style when they need to, and it may seem obvious, but it's worth reinforcing here. Quiet leaders don't always need to be quiet. They may act in a loud or extroverted manner when they need to. And there's a professor called Brian Little who refers to deviations of behavior like this as free traits. He says that the expression of behavior that deviates from our normal patterns are used to further various important projects that we are undertaking in our lives. One example he uses is trying to get help for your sick child at a hospital. You might be introverted by nature, but you may act very extroverted for a short period when you're trying to get people to assist your child. Now, this is good news because it shows we can flex our behavior when we need to. So I'm relatively quiet, but I'm not so quiet when I'm playing basketball or when I need to get my training participants to stop talking because the last interactive activity has actually finished. I'm not quiet when I'm public speaking or delivering training because that wouldn't work very well. And there's a related podcast, number 28, Why Softly Spoken Leaders Make a Big Impact. I'd urge you to check that one out as well. That was quite a while ago now, and it was still on the topic of the introverted or softly spoken leader. So with all this in mind, let's take a look at some helpful tips for some of the quiet leaders out there. Now, the first one is you need to pick your battles when you should flex to the extroverted side of the spectrum. So earlier on, I mentioned that we can flex our behavior when we need to, and the important part here is knowing when to do it and when to remain true to our more quiet nature. So knowing this requires a degree of self-awareness. After all, if we don't know what's important to us, then we'll struggle to make the call. So here are some ideas to help you pick your battles. The first one is to understand your core values. Now, when these have the potential to be violated, this might be a time for you to speak up, to be assertive, and to stand your ground. Now, you can learn more about understanding your core values in episode number 206, so go back and check that one out if you haven't already. The second thing to think about is to think for the longer term. Sometimes we run into trouble when we set a poor precedent for the future. For example, if a team member behaves badly but receives no feedback or consequences, they may feel they can keep acting that way. We need to understand the precedent we want to set, and we may need to speak a little louder to set it. Thirdly, we need to have a clear understanding of our goals. We need to understand our goals for our leadership, our team, and for our lives in general. And when these goals are put at risk or we have an opportunity to move closer to them, we might consider flexing to a more outspoken or extroverted style. Now, in those 3 points, I feel like I've captured many of the situations in which we might choose to flex our approach. If someone speaks over us in a meeting, for example, we might choose to be more assertive to stop a precedent being set that we will always be spoken over. Or we may choose to speak up to make sure our goals aren't being threatened when people aren't listening. So the important thing here is to pick your battles and to be intentional about when you choose a more extroverted approach. And there's a related article in the show notes page as well, why you need to speak up at work and why you don't, thoughtfulleader.com/224. And while you're at it, if you think you can benefit from a coaching session with me, you can apply for a complimentary coaching session on that show notes page, and we'll see whether we can tee up a conversation. Now, I can't coach everyone, but if you don't apply, you'll never know. Now, the second thing to think of when you're a quiet leader is to protect your downtime. Many quiet leaders feel pressure to be more outgoing, to speak up more, and to be more extroverted. So yes, we can flex our style when we need to, but doing this for a prolonged period is likely to lead to mental stress and fatigue, because in some ways we are acting as the extrovert for a short period. So we don't want to mess with our quiet leadership style. We want to use it as our main approach, only deviating from it when the need arises. And otherwise we might find ourselves doing this acting too often, which can be tiring. So protect your downtime, whether this means booking a meeting room with yourself to work quietly on something important, or safeguarding the time where you take a 10-minute walk at lunch. Your quiet time is precious and it helps you to recharge. So whatever form it takes, be sure to protect it. My third tip here is to use process to help you be more extroverted when you need to. So relying only on our willpower can be fraught with danger, and some suggest that it's a finite resource which can run out and have us giving in to our temptations. Quiet leaders naturally like to be quiet. It's their normal state. So if we're constantly trying to force ourselves out of our comfort zone to be more extroverted, we may struggle with this. So one way I like to think about approaching this challenge is to take willpower off the table by using process instead. Now, I used to work with a colleague who had a scheduled meeting booked in her calendar with her team, and she called it team time. There's no fixed agenda, it was simply a block of time or several times each week where she could make sure she was free and available for her team to speak with her. Now, this meant she was always making time for her team, even when she was very busy, which was quite often. Now, it kept communication lines open and guaranteed some spots in the week where people could definitely find her. Now, the point here is that she made a commitment to her team to be available. Now, she didn't decide every week whether she would have her team time or ask herself whether she could be bothered. She just did it. Now, in this way, we can use process to help us engage in the behavior we want rather than relying on willpower to do it for us. So as a quiet leader, you might be tempted to work peacefully and avoid engagement with others. A process like team time, for example, might help you to open up engagement with your team even when you instinctively don't feel like it. Now, the fourth thing I'd suggest is to remember the strengths of the quiet leader. We often celebrate the characteristics of the charismatic leader: engaging, inspiring, charming, influential, a person of the people. A quiet leader may feel intimidated by these characteristics and feel as if they don't actually have them. However, there are many good characteristics that quiet leaders do have. In my experience, quiet leaders are better listeners, and that's because they aren't speaking all the time. They can be more observant, noticing things that others may miss. I think generally they're more introspective and reflective, and this can have a big positive influence on our leadership. They may be more empathetic as well, understanding the point of view of others, and they may create the feeling of a safer environment than a dominant or extroverted leader who may have a tendency to speak over people or be louder than the people around them. So never forget the qualities that you bring to the table. Now these are only a few, and you'll probably be able to identify many more of your own. So use your strengths as much as you can and remind yourself of them often. Now the fifth and final tip for me here is that quiet leaders should get specific to push back on extroverted expectations. So when I speak to leaders struggling with their quiet or introverted nature, I notice that they feel there is a weight of expectation on them. They feel they should be more outgoing or outspoken. And in my younger years, I used to be quite hard on myself, saying things like, oh, I should be more like such and such, or I should be doing more of this thing. Now my mum would sometimes catch me saying this and would sometimes ask me, well, who says you should? And the answer is often nobody, but sometimes we put the pressure on ourselves to be different than what we are. Now the point is, we need to push back on the perceived expectations that we feel, make sure they're real and not just in your head. But sometimes the expectations are real. People might say you should speak up more, or you need to do more networking, or market yourself better, or something like that. Now in the face of these statements, instead of feeling bad, ask for specifics. Ask how this will help to improve your work performance, or what it is specifically about this behavior that is impacting your work. Now sometimes people with these expectations don't actually have a good answer. They are simply passing on their own expectations of what a leader should be like based on their own biases and experiences. So don't always assume you need to be different. Find out why being different would help and then make the decision about what to do. And I'll leave you with one more bonus tip for quiet leaders, and that is, if you want to be able to be more assertive, speak up more, be a bit louder or more extroverted in different situations, practice makes perfect. You won't get better unless you actually practice and put yourself out of your comfort zone. Sometimes I deliver training and I get a room full of people who are on the introverted side of the spectrum, and I get the sense that sometimes they're looking for some magical trick which will help them feel more confident and speak up, maybe a type of sentence they could say or something like that. But there's no magical trick here. There's no magical tool or technique that is going to help you be more extroverted or feel more comfortable speaking up. Sometimes you just need to put yourself out of your comfort zone and actually speak up more to get better at it and feel more comfortable. Now, that's not to say there's nothing that will help you do these things, but ultimately it comes down to where the rubber hits the road, and that is when you actually try it in practice. So I'd encourage you, if you want to speak up more or be more extroverted in some sort of setting, I'd encourage you to set a goal or two and say, hey, this week I'm going to raise my idea or suggestion in a meeting 3 times. Or every month I'm going to go to one networking event and introduce myself to one new person. I mean, you can start small and build from there. But sometimes you just have to push yourself out of your comfort zone before you'll actually start to feel that benefit and to actually start feeling a little more comfortable flexing your style. So we have our fair share of noise in our workplaces. I would like to encourage you not to change your default style or approach, and be sure to remind yourself of the value that you bring to the table. And of course, we can all benefit from being louder at times, speaking up with our ideas and suggestions or issues, depending on the situation. But remember that being loud does not necessarily equal good leadership. And I'd love to hear from the quiet leaders out there on the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/224. Leave a comment there. Let me know your experiences of being a quiet leader and what you've done to try to improve in that area. Okay, thank you for listening to this episode once again. I really appreciate it. If you enjoy this episode or the podcast in general, I'd love it if you could leave a positive review on your podcast app of choice. It really helps me get the word out about the Thoughtful Leader podcast so we can create better leaders around the world. That's enough for me for this week. Take care of yourself and your team, and I'll be back next week.